This is for IB Math. I have this page of notes where it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 sets with 3 planes in each one. And I want to show you how to work this by hand and also how to use a calculator. So my plan is, this will be the first of 4 videos. So on this first one, so we remember what could happen if we have 3 planes. There's 8 different scenarios, and we could have that we'll find out. Basically, our short answer is that they don't intersect, they intersect at a line, or they intersect at a point, or there's something parallel. So on this one, the first thing I notice with the normal vector 2, -3, 4, 1, -1, -1, -1, 2, -1, none of those are parallel. Okay, so we eliminate the parallel possibilities. So what we're going to do is we're going to use matrices. I'm going to do it on another piece of paper. So I'm going to convert this. To do this by hand, I'm going to convert this into a matrix where my first column is the x, the second column is the y, the third column is the z. Maybe a little rusty, but I think it's still part of my wheelhouse. Okay, -1, 2, -1, -2. Okay, so when we're working with matrices, there's 3 things we can do. We can switch rows, we can multiply a row by a number, and we can add rows. That's it. You can't add the same thing to each value. That won't work. Because what you're doing here is you're working with this equation, with these equations. And I can multiply through by something. I can rewrite them in whatever order I want, and I can add 2 equations together. Okay, so the first thing I notice, and my goal is to get as close to the identity matrix with an A, B, and C right here. If I get the identity matrix that equals A, B, and C, then that would mean my 1x equals A, my 1y equals B, my 1z equals C. And that would mean that my 3 planes intersected at a point. So I'm going to try and work to that point. So what I notice here, first of all, is I have a positive 1. So let me just switch row 1 and row 2. That's a -3. Okay, and so what I'll do is I'll just write this is now row 2 and this is now row 1. So I like to write off to the side of the row or the matrix that I've changed what I did to get there. Okay, now working with that, I want to get zeros here and here. So I'm going to write down this top row. And I'm going to say, okay, -2 times row 1 plus row 2. If I multiply this by -2 and add it together, that'll give me a 0. And so -2 times 1 is -2 plus 2 is 0. -2, that's now a +2, and a -3 is a -1. -2 times a -1 is, and I just forgot for a second. So what I did is I looked back here. What am I multiplying by? There's a lot of little details that you can get lost in. So writing this down can make a big difference. Okay, so that's a +2 plus 4 is 6. That's a +2 plus 1 is 3. And then now I want to do this one. I can just add row 1 and add to row 3. And then that'll give me a 0. So add those, I'm at 0. Add those, I'm at 1. Add those, I'm at -2. Add those, I'm at -3. Okay, now I want to get I want a +1 here, and then I want zeros on top of it. And so when I work through to get my goal, I would do this, getting that would be first, getting these 2 zeros would be second. Sorry, my pen's not great. Getting this 1 would be third. Then getting these 2 zeros would be fourth. This would be fifth. And the last step that I'm going to do is to get zeros here. So that would be my 6th step to do that. Because once I already have zeros in place, then I can keep moving on, and those won't affect other things. And we'll see if what I just said makes sense as we work. Okay, so I want a +1. Okay, it doesn't matter a whole lot, but okay, I can either, at this point I'm trying to decide if I want to multiply this by -1 or switch rows. It doesn't really matter a whole lot. Let's just These might be smaller numbers to work with on these other things. Let's just switch rows. So this was 0, 1, -2, -3. This is 0, -1, 6, 3. So this was now row 3. This was row 2. Okay, now I can add, if I notice I have a positive 1, if I add it to this row or add it to that row, well, I'm going to keep this row. And now row 2 plus row 1 will give me a 0 here. So this is row 1 plus row 2. So 0 plus 1 is still 1. -1 plus 1 is 0. -1 plus -2 is -3. I'm just adding, that gives me a -4. Okay, notice adding these two rows, I'll get a 0 in this spot. So now I'm going to do row 2 plus row 3. 0 plus 0 is 0. And notice, oh, sorry, you can't see what I'm doing. Notice that these zeros make life easy. They didn't change this first column because I had the zeros there. So 1 plus 0, wow. 1 plus -1 is 0. There we go. I wrote down the correct thing. I just didn't say it correctly. This gives me a 4. That gives me a 0. Okay, and now the next thing. So I've got my 1 and my zeros. I've got my 1 and my zeros. And so what I want here is a 1. Remember that was the 5th thing we wanted to do, and then get zeros. Well, so on this one, I can divide through by 4, or I can multiply through by 1/4. So I'm keeping this. And I'm going to say, okay, I want a 4th of row 3. Okay, 0, 0, a 4th of 4 is 1, a 4th of 0 is still 0. And now I want to get rid of these. Now my goal is to get zeros here. So I'm going to keep this row. Oh, you can't see it. So I like to write down the row that I'm going to keep. And then I'm going to say, okay, this is, well, the top row. I just need to multiply this by 3 and then add it. So this is 3 times row 3 plus row 1. So 3 times 0 is still 0 plus 1 is 1. 0 plus 0 is still 0. 3 plus -3 is 0. 0 times 3 is still 0, and that's a -4. And now I want to get rid of this, so I can multiply here by +2. So 2 times row 3 plus row 2. So 0 times 0, or 0 times anything, still 0. 0 times 2 is 0, plus 0 is 0. I should not be getting new values in the area that I've already worked. 0 times 2 is still 0, plus 1 is still 1. This, 1 times 2, 2 plus -2 is 0. 0 times 2 is still 0, and that's a -3. Okay, and now here is what we have found. We have found that our 3 planes intersect, and the x value would be -4, the y value would be -3, and the z value is 0. So if they say, find their point of intersection, the point of intersection is the point -4, -3, 0. If they say, what's the position vector? Well, they're not likely to do that. They're likely to ask you for the point of intersection, and there it is. Okay, go look for video number 2. I'm going to keep cruising along with this worksheet.